Nathan Cole had always believed he was a man who made good decisions. He had built Cole Industries from a mid-size real estate firm into a $2 billion empire before he turned 40. He had made good decisions about markets, about timing, about people. He had a reputation in Chicago's business world for being precise, unsentimental, and almost never wrong. He had been wrong exactly once. Her name was Rachel. Rachel Cole, Rachel Bennett before she took his name, had been his wife for 6 years. She was not flashy. She was not the kind of woman who walked into rooms and commanded them with her appearance. She was quiet in the way that deep water is quiet, still on the surface, with everything important happening underneath. She had a master's degree in nonprofit management and ran a literacy program for underprivileged children on Chicago's South Side that she had built from nothing, with no funding from Nathan, on sheer will and borrowed conference room space. She made him coffee every morning before he was awake. She remembered the names of every person on his staff, from his executive assistant down to the night security guard, and she asked about their families. She had a laugh that arrived slowly and then took over completely, and Nathan had once, in the early years, rearranged an entire Tuesday just to hear it. He had stopped noticing these things somewhere around year 4. That was the truth he would spend a long time sitting with afterward. Not that he had fallen out of love suddenly, but that he had stopped looking. And love without attention is just a habit, and habits are easy to break. Sienna Voss had walked into the Cole Industries annual gala in March of that year wearing a red dress and the specific confidence of a woman who understood exactly the effect she was having on every person in the room. She was 28, a former runway model turned brand ambassador, and she had looked at Nathan across the room the way nobody had looked at him in years, like he was the most interesting thing she had seen. Not his company, not his net worth, him. He knew later that it had been a performance. At the time, it felt like oxygen. He had told Rachel in April, not gently. Nathan Cole did not do things gently when he had already made his decision. Gentleness, he believed then, was just delay, and delay was weakness. He had sat across from her at their kitchen table on a Sunday morning and told her that he wanted a divorce, that he had met someone, and that he was sorry, but he believed this was the honest thing to do rather than pretend. Rachel had been quiet for a very long time. Then she had said, with a steadiness that unsettled him more than tears would have, "Okay, Nathan." Just that, "Okay, Nathan." She had not fought, had not thrown things or screamed or called his office demanding explanations. She had met with the lawyers, with the same quiet precision she brought to everything, accepted a settlement that his attorney privately told him was far less than she was entitled to, signed the papers, and disappeared from his life with the same silence with which she had entered it. He had married Sienna 11 months later in a ceremony that was photographed for 3 separate lifestyle publications. She wore a dress that cost more than Rachel's entire annual nonprofit budget. Nathan stood at the altar and told himself this was the life he had chosen, and it was the right one, and he was not going to look backward. He was very good at not looking backward for approximately 14 months. The first thing that cracked was the money. Sienna's relationship with Nathan's wealth was not a relationship, it was a consumption. She was not malicious about it, which somehow made it worse. She spent the way people breathe, without awareness, without stopping, because stopping had never been necessary. The penthouse renovation, the wardrobe, the trips, the circle of friends she maintained who treated Nathan's home like a hotel with excellent catering. Nathan had not minded at first. He had money, and she made him feel, in those early months, like spending it was a form of living fully rather than simply leaking. But somewhere in the second year, he began to feel the specific hollowness of a life that was entirely surface. Every conversation with Sienna lived in the shallow end. Events, appearances, other people's drama, what they were doing next, and where they were being seen. When Cole Industries hit a complicated period in the third quarter, and Nathan came home genuinely worried about a series of acquisitions that were underperforming, Sienna had listened for approximately 4 minutes before, redirecting the conversation to a conflict she was having with her brand partnership team. He had sat in his own living room that night and thought about Rachel, the way she used to sit across from him during hard quarters and ask real questions, the kind that meant she had been paying attention, the kind that sometimes surfaced angles he hadn't considered. He had pushed the thought away. He was good at that. The second crack was worse. It came on a Wednesday in November, 18 months into the marriage, when Nathan's executive assistant forwarded him a newsletter from a Chicago nonprofit coalition. It was a quarterly publication, celebrating organizations that had achieved significant community impact milestones. He almost deleted it. He read it instead because his assistant had highlighted a specific entry. The Bennett Literacy Foundation, founded by Rachel Bennett Cole, now operating as Rachel Bennett, following her return to her maiden name, had in the past 18 months expanded to 11 locations across Chicago, secured federal grant funding of $1.4 million, and was being recognized as one of the most effective literacy intervention programs in Illinois history. The article included a photograph. Rachel was standing in front of a classroom full of children, mid-laugh, her whole face taken over by it the way he remembered. And she looked like someone who had walked out of a life that was too small for her and into one that fit perfectly. Nathan sat with that newsletter for a long time. He began to understand, slowly and then all at once, what he had dismissed as ordinary. The woman who had quietly built a literacy program in borrowed conference rooms while running his household and attending his galas and making his coffee at 6 in the morning had not been ordinary. She had been extraordinary in the direction he had never bothered to look. He had left her for a woman who looked at him. He had not noticed that Rachel had always seen him. The third crack finished it. It was Priya, his executive assistant, who had worked for Nathan for 9 years and was the closest thing he had to an honest voice in his professional life, who finally said the thing nobody else would. She had come into his office on a Friday afternoon with his weekend briefing and set it on his desk and then stood there with the specific expression of someone who has decided to say something they cannot unsay. She knew, Priya said. Nathan looked up. What? Rachel. Priya held his gaze. She knew about Sienna before you told her. She had known for 2 months. I know because she called me the week she found out and asked me if you seemed happy. Priya paused. She didn't ask me to tell her what was happening. She didn't ask me to intervene. She just asked if you seemed happy. And when I didn't know what to say, she said, "Thank you, Priya," and hung up. The office was very quiet. She never said a word, Priya continued. Not during the divorce, not after. She took less than she deserved in the settlement because she told me this herself. Later, she said she didn't want anything that had his weight on it. She wanted to build something that was only hers. She picked up her folder. I thought you should know, not to do anything with it, just to know. Nathan sat at his desk for a long time after Priya left. He thought about a woman who had discovered her husband's betrayal and said nothing for 2 months, who had continued making his coffee and attending his events and running her nonprofit and carrying that knowledge alone, silently, because she was not going to burn down her own dignity to punish him for burning down her heart. He thought about what that kind of strength looked like from the outside. He had called it ordinary. Now, right here, before this story ends, there is something that needs to be said to you directly. Because if you have stayed this far, if you have watched every minute of Nathan's reckoning, you already know something he is only now learning. We do not lose people when they leave. We lose them in the 1,000 small moments before that. Every time we stop looking. Every time we mistake stillness for emptiness. Every time we walk past extraordinary because it didn't announce itself loudly enough. If someone in your life loves you quietly, loves you in the direction you never bother to look, see them. Before the newsletter. Before the Friday afternoon. Before it is too late. Stay until the very last second of this video. And if these stories find something true in you, like this video and subscribe to this channel. Because every week we are here with stories that remind you what actually matters. Back to Nathan. He did not call Rachel. He was not owed that conversation and he knew it. He did not show up at the Bennett Literacy Foundation, or engineer a meeting or do any of the things a man does when he has realized his mistake and wants to feel better about it, by turning his regret into someone else's problem. What he did was call his attorney and instruct him to make an anonymous donation to the Bennett Literacy Foundation, a significant one, not as payment, not as apology, because it was the right thing to do, and because it was the only gesture he could make that was entirely for her, and not at all for himself. Then he went home to his penthouse and looked at his life, with the lights all the way on. For the first time in years, the divorce from Sienna was quiet and expensive and mutual. She had, it turned out, been waiting for Nathan to become a different kind of man than he was, and he had been waiting for Sienna to become a different kind of woman. And eventually they had both grown tired of waiting. There was no drama. There was just the particular sadness of two people acknowledging that they had wanted versions of each other that neither had ever actually been. Nathan did not look for Rachel. He did not deserve to look for Rachel. What he did was begin, slowly and without announcement, to become a man who paid attention. He learned the names of people he had previously looked through. He asked real questions and waited for real answers. He took a board seat on a nonprofit coalition, the same one that had published the newsletter, and showed up to every meeting and did the actual work rather than lending his name to it. He heard about Rachel from time to time through the city's philanthropic circles, that she was well, that the foundation was thriving, that she had, by every account, become exactly who she had always been becoming. He had just never stayed in one place long enough to watch it happen. One evening, 2 years after the divorce from Sienna, Nathan was leaving a coalition fundraiser when he saw her across the lobby. She was speaking to a group of donors, animated and certain, the way she always was when she was talking about something she loved. She had not seen him. He could have left without her knowing he was there. He almost did. Instead, he waited until her conversation finished. And when she turned and saw him, he did not smile with the confidence of a man who expected to be forgiven. He just looked at her and said quietly, "You built something extraordinary, Rachel." She looked at him for a long moment, and then she said, "I know." Not for him, not to hurt him. Just the simple, grounded truth of a woman who finally, fully, knew her own worth and needed no one's recognition to confirm it. He nodded. She held his gaze one more second. Then she turned and walked back into the room full of people whose lives she was changing. Nathan stood in the lobby alone and understood, completely and permanently, the difference between a woman who needs to be seen and a woman who no longer needs you to see her. He had spent 6 years married to the first kind of extraordinary and called it ordinary. He would spend the rest of his life making sure he never made that mistake again. Some lessons arrive gently. Some arrive as newsletters on a Wednesday in November. And some arrive in a hotel lobby, in 4 quiet words from a woman walking away, in the specific dignity of someone who survived you and built something beautiful from what remained. That was Rachel Bennett, and she was never ordinary, not for a single day.